to the MMA Road Show, episode number 477. My name is John Morgan. Cold coffee is about, I don't know, what is that, like 10,000 miles, 8,000 miles, something like that. He's a long way away. But this is a very historic episode of the MMA Road Show because never before in history have we changed the entire schedule of the podcast just to fit a friend of ours, the highly respected Simon Head. It is so great to have you here, my man. I'm on your stomping grounds over here, so there's no way I wouldn't have you sit down at the MMA Road Show.
It is an honor and a privilege for you to completely throw your production schedule completely up in the air.
I mean, we had to communicate with the whole team. Obviously, you understand the amount of schedules that were changed
The paperwork alone
just
would have been insane just to deal with that.
The approval process, can you imagine? The approval process.
Amazing. And the fact that we've had to find an independent nation of the pair of us to sit down and this is like the United Nations happening right now.
This is incredible.
We're sitting across a very large, grandiose table as well.
Yeah, set the stage. Here we are. We'll just say, first of all, I'm excited because it's always good to see you, but we are actually here in a working capacity. We're working together. It's the debut of a brand new broadcast team. It's the debut of an organization. We are here for the very first episode of Apollo MMA. It is Apollo MMA 1. We are here in Wavre, Belgium. I don't know how French you want to get with it tomorrow night on the broadcast.
Un petit peu.
Wavre, Belgium. We are currently in the Novotel Hotel. Tomorrow we'll be in La Sucrerie. I'm not going to get that French on it tomorrow, but that's where we'll be tomorrow for the event. But right now we're just in the lobby of the Novotel, but it's happening over here. Look, in Belgium, you got Belgian beers flowing. I mean, the frosty beverages are out. Kudos, by the way, to Matt Perino for buying the first round of frosty beverages tonight. He'll be on the mic tomorrow night doing all the in-cage stuff. You and I will be on the broadcast team.
It's going to be a lot of fun. The stage is already nicely set. We've had the weigh-ins were this morning just before I turned up fashionably late, as I am likely to do. We had the press conference. We've had the pre-fight interviews. All of the preamble is now done. The fighters are now replenished. They're ready to go. They're sleeping off weigh-in day. And the next time we see them, they're going to be getting in a cage and throwing down. It's a packed fight card. A lot of amateur prospects looking to make their way in the sport. And we've got a five-fight main card with a title fight at the very top of it, featuring a veteran of the game in the UK against a rising star of the Belgian scene. So I'm really excited to be here. I've never called fights properly before. I've done teeny little bit for IMAF, but this will be the first time I properly do some co-commentary. And I feel like I'm treading on CM Punk's toes a little bit, but he couldn't make it over to Belgium, so this is my territory, Punk.
No doubt about it. Now listen, obviously, as you said, the first episode of Apollo MMA 1. Our good friend Gokhan Yadzinzi, who's been behind Bushido MMA for quite some time, is launching his new promotion. As you said, it kind of developed the scene here. I mean, we've been over here before, and it's a developing market. This has been a kickboxing market. So we're going to talk about some PFL. We're going to talk about some Bellator. We're going to talk about some UFC as well. A lot of Eurocentric news, so it kind of makes sense that you're here. But since we're here, if you guys do want to tune in Saturday night, ApolloMMA.com will be the pay-per-view there. As you said, a bunch of amateur fights to kick things off, but a 5-fight professional main card as well. Pretty interesting main event. Cedric Lushima, the undefeated prospect, against the British veteran in Jason Radcliffe, who I kind of like the way this pairing is done, right? Because you got Cedric Lushima, who is, by all accounts, one of the top prospects in this market, right? He's one of the flag bearers for the Belgian scene, undefeated. Fought last time I was here. The last time I was actually on the call, I should say. And was able to pick up a victory, but wasn't exactly excited with his performance, right? So this is one of those guys that had been finishing everybody. It then gets pushed to the limit, which, by the way, I think is a good thing sometimes.
No bad thing at all.
When you get that extra cage time in, you get the feel for, hey, I can go the distance. I can, I know what it takes to get a decision, although this one is stepping up to 5 rounds. So here's the guy that's the young, hot, commodity that looks like he'll be the next big thing. Meanwhile, you got Jason Radcliffe, who, man, I love the vibe we were getting from Jason Radcliffe today, right? I mean, you know him well, a seasoned British veteran. He's fought in KSW. He's fought in Bellator. I mean, he's been around the block, right? He's fought in the big shows. It was funny. We were sitting down doing, the production interviews with him, and come on, man, he's done it. He was nailing the answers. He knows what he's doing. And, man, I thought he had the right attitude, right? He's like, dude, I'm not here to pee anybody's stepping stone. If you're not taking me seriously, believe it. I am tougher than maybe you give me credit for. And he's had some setbacks, but he's a veteran that's fought some big names. So I think this could be an intriguing main event.
Yeah, it's kind of the yin and the yang, isn't it? You've got the young gun coming up, undefeated, largely untested. It has to be said. You know, he's been pushed to the limit in that last fight, and it's in those fights where you really learn just what you've got as a fighter. And he might not have been too happy with the overall performance, but I think he'll look back on that fight as a turning point for him and as a real watershed moment for him. This is going to be professional fight number 5 for Cedric Lushima. This is going to be professional fight number 30.
Is that crazy?
For Jason Radcliffe.
Crazy.
And you know, he's got 13 wins in round 1.
Yes.
13 wins in round 1. He's got 7 wins in 60 seconds or less. Do not blink when this man fights. He also, unfortunately, it's kind of live by the sword, die by the sword with Jason Radcliffe. He will go in there and it's kind of kill or be killed, really. He's very, very aggressive in his approach. And that's been his calling card all the way through his career. You know, he's been on the cusp of a Cage Warriors title, lost to Oscar Pichota, who ended up on the back of that win, joining the UFC. So that gives you an idea at the level that he's attained in his career so far. He comes out of GB top team, coached by Brad Pickett, Ashley Grimshaw.
Hey, that's a team that we don't really hear talked about a whole lot. But, you know, we were talking to their coaching staff, right? They've got fighters this weekend in PFL, over in Russia, and here as well.
Yeah.
And they said they got, about like 60 guys in the room?
65 guys on the mats in GB top team. They've got a brand new facility. I say brand new. It's probably about a year, 18 months old now in Morden, London. And it's doing really big things. And with the explosion of European MMA, we're going through a really good moment right now for European MMA. The promotions, having come out of the pandemic, things seem to have really picked up again. Some of the big promotions globally are coming back over again. We'll talk about PFL a little bit later, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
UFC are coming back. You know, they've announced a show in Paris. They've announced the show in Manchester. They've loaded the fight card for that already. We can talk about that as well. But the European scene as well is bustling. It's back up and running again. There's some real life to it. And GB Top Team are doing big things. Manchester Top Team, their sister team further up north, they're doing big things as well. So, but yeah, this is a big one. So Jason Radcliffe's got all this experience, but as well as all that experience, he also has a powerhouse team of experience behind him as well. He's got Brad Wheeler, the crazy kid, Cage Warriors veteran is going to be in his corner this weekend. And you've got Cedric Lushima, who's coming from a smaller, tighter-knit gym perhaps. He's looking to work his way up, but as you know, we sat at the press conference today. He knows exactly where he's going.
Yep.
He's got his moves planned out. Not just one move in front. He's 2, 3, 4 moves ahead. He knows exactly where he wants to go. But as he told us today, it all hinges on Saturday night in that main event. If he gets the result he wants, then the sky's the limit for him.
I love it, man. I love the matchmaking there. I think that's a very, very intriguing main event that has some real ripple effects on some careers moving forward. So that should be a great main event. As I said, a lot of amateur prospects. The organization is really trying to develop the market. It's needed. Organizations like this are needed all over the world, right? I mean, for athletes to have an opportunity to compete, just to get the reps under their belt and to get tested against other athletes and see a chance to move forward, as you said, to plot out the moves and to get seen by scouts from other organizations, that sort of thing. So
yeah,
should be a big one.
And not just that. And you know, we had this conversation with Cedric Lushima today. He sitting down doing his pre-fight interviews. This is all new for him.
Mm-hmm.
But this is all good prep because Jason Radcliffe, he's an old hand at this. You know, he's probably forgotten how many pre-fight interviews he's done.
What?
Cedric is experiencing this quite young in his career, and he's having to make adjustments and get used to it. But it means that if he does continue to progress and he ends up in a PFL or he ends up in a UFC or even with a Cage Warriors or someone like that on one of the big European promotions where he's going to be asked to do these things, this isn't going to be new for him.
Right.
This is almost like the training wheels, you know, and if he can then slap a belt on top of all of that, then off he goes.
Well, it may seem like a silly thing, but it's really not. I mean, obviously we know how much of it's not just wins and losses, right? I mean, the important part is fighting and getting results, right? But it really is true. I mean, just getting people used to being in front of a camera, getting people used to giving interviews, right? I mean, how much of this game these days isn't just wins and losses? Yes, you got to get the wins. I mean, you can't lose 10 straight fights, but hey, but he's really good on the microphone. Let's have him headline a UFC event. Like, that doesn't happen, right? But in order to be marketable, you see it's personality, it's doing those interviews. And, I mean, look, everybody's trying to get to the highest level. Although, how about today when Was it Cedric or somebody else that said, I want to get to the big show, the UFC or the PFL? I think it was Cedric, right?
Yeah.
How, and I looked over at you, I'm like, boy, that's not something we used to hear. People didn't say, and now granted, I mean, I'm not trying to feed in too much to Don Davis's co-leader, claims and that sort of thing, but I think athletes really are seeing that, especially over here. I think athletes are seeing that. It's like, hold on. Okay, yeah, of course, I grew up watching the UFC. That's where I want to be. But, normally it was Bellator. People would say, hey, UFC, Bellator. People did say one championship a little bit every now and then, especially if they liked the Asian scene. Hearing less of that as they're focusing more on kickboxing and submission grappling and that sort of thing. But now that Bellator is part of PFL, that perked my ears up a little bit to hear Lushima say, and then the big show, the UFC or PFL. I think it shows kind of where the fighters are starting to see, hey, maybe there's opportunities for me there.
I think what you're looking at now in the MMA market as a whole is that the takeoff, the launch pad to get you from the regional scene to the world stage. There's a bit more, the on-ramp is a little bit shallower and a little bit longer, so it gives you more options. So whereas before you fight for a promotion externally and then you just hope that you've done enough and you've built up a big enough body of work to get the call from the UFC or a Bellator as it would have been back then. Now you've got these sort of in-between sort of stages where you can jump in. So you don't have to jump straight into the PFL global season. There's PFL Europe or there's PFL MENA. There's going to be PFL Australia. There's going to be PFL Africa. And the idea with that is they're building their talent gradually until they get to a level, and then they join the global scene. With the UFC, it's slightly different. They have regular promotions on the regional scene who are in partnership with the UFC through UFC Fight Pass. You've got CFFC, who obviously you're very
fine organization,
very heavily involved with. On my side of the pond, we've got Cage Warriors who have a proven track record of delivering not just fighters to the UFC, but fighters that stick around and make a dent in the UFC. So, these promotions.
Some names you might have heard of: Conor McGregor, Joanna Jacek.
There's one or two. There's one or two. I think they're well past the 100 mark in terms of fighters have made it. But so slightly different business models, but the theory is the same. You fight on the regional scene. You build a name, you then join a promotion that acts as your launch pad to the big leagues, if you like. And, the PFL was directly referred to as the big leagues today. So, feather in the cap for Don Davis and Pete Murray, who are doing good work over there at the PFL. They're still building. There's a lot to do.
The UFC is by far the market leader.
Yes,
by far.
And if you're a fighter and you're on the come up now, you've got that magic word now. You have options. There isn't just one route. You've got multiple routes. You've also got European promotions who have got a little bit of funding who can pay you relatively well to fight at just below that level.
It's a great time, right? Octagon is doing
Octagon are doing incredible things.
Obviously, KSW has been doing great things for a long time as well.
So you've got these promotions who are doing this, but it's all about building stages so that you can make those transitions and, the steps between each one aren't too steep. And then what you find is when the fighters do reach that top level, they're ready.
Right.
I remember years ago, Jimmy Manuwa.
Yeah.
He got asked to join the UFC twice, and he was fighting for UC MMA, Ultimate Challenge MMA in London, in front of a few hundred, maybe 1,000 people in the Troxy in London. And he was knocking people out left, right, and centre. And the UFC came to him twice, and each time Jimmy said, "Nah, I'm not ready." Bear in mind, this is a guy at the time who was. He came to MMA really late.
Yeah.
He didn't start professional MMA until he was in his mid to late 20s.
Right, it wasn't like he had time on his side.
No, but even then, he was quite smart in that he waited. He got his chance, and when he did get into the UFC, he didn't quite make it to championship level, but he was just a bit below that. But he made it to contender status and scored some highlight reel knockouts over some big names. So, Ovin St. Preux, Corey Anderson, people who have gone on and done reasonable things, they've both gone on and challenged for championships in major organisations. So he sparked both of them. But he waited because he knew he wasn't ready. And the temptation, especially when you're young, is to, I've got the call up, I've got to go. And sometimes it can break you before you had the chance to make it.
We say it all the time at CFFC. Like, the last thing we would do is hold anybody back. Of course, the entire thing that we're trying to do is help athletes develop and get themselves ready. And again, develop themselves in the cage, develop themselves on camera, all those things, right? And to get them ready. But there is a danger, especially right now. I feel like Contender Series is assisting people in rushing a little bit too much. Where they're like, hey man, I know if I get to 6-0, they'll call me and I can get on Contender Series. And say, okay, wait. okay, that may happen, but are you ready to get there? Because if I'm not saying that if you're ready to step in the UFC, you need to look at the champion and be like, pretty sure I could take that guy. I mean, there's still some developing to have, but that is the key. And it sounds like a cliche, but the goal is not to get there. The goal is to stay there. And I always feel bad saying that because, if you're an amateur and you're trying to get into the pros, it's kind of hard to say like, hey man, slow down, get some more amateur experience, because it's like, well, hey, I'd like to get paid. Fair, I can't argue with that. And same thing for a budding professional that says, well, I'm 6-0 and the UFC's calling, I know it's not the greatest, but they're going to pay me 12 and 12. Like, I can't. I'm not making 1,200 and 1,200 here. They're going to pay me 12,000 and 12,000. I need to take it. And it's hard to look a guy in the eye and say, I know what you're saying, but think long term, right? I know you see that paycheck right now, but think long term. And Jimmy Manuel did. Patty Pimblett turned down a couple invitations, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. On? I think that.
I wonder, was that
there might have been a money thing involved as well.
Well, he was, because he was doing pretty well.
He was doing quite well, but I think the UFC have got a bit of an opportunity here if they want to do this, and it's literally. This is just an idea that popped into my head while we were talking just now, so take it and throw it away if you want. But Dana White last weekend talked about they want to get out of the Apex.
Right.
They want to start doing fight night shows in front of arena crowds again. Obviously, when they do it, the response is huge. They're getting big gate receipts these days. They're getting, cities are begging the UFC to come and hold events there. I still think that the UFC Apex has a role that it could play, and it could be as that interim spot between Contender Series and then the arena shows. So you go from being a Contender Series graduate, maybe you fight in the Apex a few times, and the Apex is like the realm of the proving ground, if you like,
right,
above the Contender Series. So the Contender Series gets you your UFC contract. Then you're then sort of building these guys up against people at a sort of similar level in the Apex. Then when they're ready to release into the wild in front of a big arena crowd, boom, you put them in there, you get them on the prelims. Just like you put them in the prelims, you work their way up to the TV prelims, and then the main card, then the championship level. They have the option there. If they want to add another little layer to their development, they could do that.
Well, here's something that people do need to realize. The Apex is not ever going away, right?
No.
I mean, there's far too much money invested into it. It is far too logical for them and cost savings for them. Here's one thing that they haven't utilized yet that they talked about in the beginning that I'm anxious to see if they do this as well. And I guess they kind of have a little bit with, like, the road to the UFC stuff with it, is doing things off hours in Las Vegas at the Apex that are on hours in prime time for the UK, for Asia, whatever it may be. Because normally you would have to rent a building out at a weird time. You would have to pay for staff at a weird time that would probably charge you overtime. That would probably others. Here, everything's all set up. There's no truck rental. There's no whatever. You go in. It's turnkey. You've already
plug
paid
and play.
for it. Plug and play, 100%. You know what I mean? So that's something they could get to. It kind of leads me into look. We're not going to talk a lot about the Bellator Champions Series event in Paris, essentially because it's starting right now as we're doing this. And so by the time we ship this off to the wonderful Cold Coffee to get this edited and we get it posted, most people have probably seen it. So I don't want to break down much with the Bellator Champions Series, but I did want to get your take as a European resident, a European journalist, somebody who follows this game very closely, because me, and this is not anything new, I've said it 100 times, but I'll say it again, I feel like the PFL/Bellator's biggest opportunity is the fact that they can go to these global markets, and especially with PFL and these regional leagues. You touched on PFL Europe, PFL MENA being launched, all these things being done, that they're delivering content in prime time, right? And we've joked over the years, and we'll talk about UFC 304 in just a little bit, about how hard it is to be a hardcore fan here, because you've got to watch the shows at like 4 o'clock in the morning. And I know you have to stay up to these crazy hours, so you've dealt with it more than much. But I guess, can you tell me what kind of inroads you see, for instance, PFL Europe making? And again, I understand. Look, I spent a lot of time working for MMA Junkie for many years. I tracked web traffic very, very much so. And I understand that the difference between the leader and the co-leader in web traffic and attention is a significant chasm, right? However, so I'm not suggesting by any stretch, like, bro, by delivering in prime time, nobody's going to watch that UFC stuff anymore. They're all watching this now. But do you feel that it is helping them at least find a market, find audience, find awareness? Because I feel like the fact that they have the ability to. I mean, we've seen it certainly with these live gates in Paris. It's been incredible. Not having to go at 4 a.m, I think has been amazing. But do you feel like they're making inroads by delivering this content in prime time?
Yeah, they absolutely are. And I think it was even today they've announced that the PFL Europe finale is going to be in Lyon,
right,
in France. They're doubling down on the French market, and rightly so, because that is France right now is like Ireland a few years ago when Conor was on the way up. There's that real sort of groundswell of support. There's a real appetite for the sport now. It's they've been starved of it in terms of having top level events over there, and more people are being exposed to it. But it's a much longer play at work here when it comes to the PFL. We're talking about putting events on in prime time in each region. That's great. That's great because what it does, it puts the product in front of the market at the best time for them to watch it. Now, the brand awareness is something that will come over time, and that's going to be a slow burner. That's going to take some time. But the other thing that doesn't get talked about enough is the fact that by plugging in these regional leagues and bringing on these prospects from each of these different global markets, they're building their own stars. They might not be stars right now, but you gradually work your way through. You've got someone who comes through the PFL MENA system, wins the title. Dan Hardy and the guys who have got a shoe in with the Global League can assess and go, is this person ready for the Global League yet? If the answer's no, you stick them back in to try and repeat.
Right.
And then you just build and build. Or you might capture lightning in a bottle and you think, okay, this person's got star written all over him. Dakota Decheva, who has been who's won PFL Europe without breaking a sweat. Right, without breaking a sweat, and is now in the PFL Global season, and I think she's going to do very well in that as well. So you can assess as you go, but that's the slow play. Over time, you're going to start building your own stars. Rather than having, obviously the free agency thing will carry on. As long as the investment's there and the money's there, you can maybe win some of these free agency battles.
Well, they said they always want to turn over their roster like 50%, right? They don't. They say they don't want to keep the same guys or gals every year because then you just get the same fights.
It gets
every
a style products, and you've got rematches of fights that you don't want to see anyway. So, but if you're building your own stars and you've got that talent pipeline, and it's all under your own umbrella, you've got control of that from root to tip, so to speak, all the way through. Then you've got something, but that takes time. That takes time. We're in sort of the early growth stages right now. They're basically planting the seeds in all the key markets. Look in sort of 4, 5, 6 years' time. If they keep this thing rolling the way that they need to, in 4, 5, 6 years' time, they're going to have legitimate stars coming out of each region. Then it's a case of, okay, then you've got a truly global league, because it isn't just fighters from the United States, Canada and Brazil, right? And the odd European thrown in for good measure. You'll then have a proper... There's a couple of promotions who like to use the phrase the Champions League of MMA, right? Octagon have done it. PFL have done it. But
it's not a bad thing to do, right?
It's not a bad
saying
thing.
we're the NFL of whatever. Like, hey, well, somebody's at the top.
But the idea of having these global leagues and building your talent up...
I think they really have the right to say Champions League.
Yeah, I think so. And like the way this works is you've got the primetime market, so you're building your stars. It's people who look like you, talk like you, come from possibly the town that you live in, right? And you can watch them at a sensible time for you, and you see them grow and develop and become a star. Couple that with clever storytelling and good PR, and build it over time. All of a sudden, you've got a big product in sort of 5, 6, 7 years' time.
And I think there's two other things that it really helps with. I think for the athletes, the brand loyalty. Like, I think of like an Aaron Pico and AJ McKee that Bellator invested in very early on, right? We're going to take you from day one, and we're going to show you love. And so when those contracts would come up where they had opportunities to leave, a lot of times they'd say, A, I'm probably getting paid more than I would get paid if I went to the UFC, but B, you know what? You guys gave me a chance. I'm sticking around. Now, I know, guys like Michael Chandler obviously have seen that, hey, going over can do really well for you too. You can get opportunities to fight Conor McGregor. But I do think there's some brand loyalty. And, you talk about the equity thing. Like, and it's interesting because the UFC fosters a lot of growth with UFC Fight Pass, right? But they're not directly, and they actually make it a way. They go out of their way. Like, they don't tell the independent organizations how to do business. They're just like, hey, we're going to pay licensing fees for your organization. We're not going to tell you how to operate your organization. This is different, obviously, right? Because they're directly operating it. But I think, like you said, Dakota Tcheva is a great example, right? Had Dakota Tcheva been CFFC champion and then signs with the UFC, is it the same cachet? Is it the same meaning as like already in your farm system and came up? You know what I mean? It's like a direct thing, whereas it's a little more indirect when you go through the organizations on Fight Pass route. And so I think maybe it does create a little more equity and tie to the brand for a viewer as well.
Yeah, I think it's kind of case by case. I mean, if you took Dakota as an example, if we're running with that, if she'd gone through Cage Warriors and became Cage Warriors Women's Flyweight Champion, Molly McCann became Cage Warriors Women's Flyweight Champion,
right?
Joined the UFC, and she's become a star in the UFC. And she is a genuine star in the UK. She's one of the most recognisable female fighters in the UFC, and that she's gone through that route. And I'm sure that if Dakota had gone that route, she would enjoy success along similar lines, right? She's going through the PFL route, and it's a different route, but I also think that's going to bring the best out of her as well, because when you've got fighters who are low on experience but high on talent, the risk is always that they get rushed.
Right.
Always the risk is that
100%.
they're going to get rushed, right? So, but with this system where you have a season, you're basically saying, here's a year. Do what you can do in the year, and then we'll assess the next step.
Yep.
It's not
and
like
3 or 4 fights.
It's not like win this fight, boom, instantly move up, or you
Yep.
win these 2 fights, boom, instantly move up. You've got a year, and sometimes slow playing it, if you've got the talent, is the right thing to do.
I agree. It's interesting. It really is interesting. Look, it's funny, man. Obviously, I still am honored to sit cage side at UFC events and take part in those. I mean, gosh, it wasn't that long ago that I was standing up with my hands on my head because I was blown away by a moment that was so unbelievable. But I have such passion about grassroots, and it's so important not to forget that, like, you have to continue to foster this. So when I see what the PFL is putting in, when I see what Apollo MMA is doing here, when I see obviously my main company, CFFC, and what they're doing with, MMA, Muay Thai, submission grappling, college wrestling as well. My buddies out at Fight League Atlantic, Tough Enough in Las Vegas. I mean, it is so important not to lose sight of what's happening on the scene and the importance of the scene globally around the world to keep the talent and the sport developing and growing.
MMA is a strange sport in many ways, but one of the things that makes it strange and very different to most other sports, it's a sport that kind of grew upside down, right? it grew the top level first.
That's true.
It grew the top level first and then had to build the infrastructure underneath it. Normally it works the other way around, right? You normally build and then grow, whereas what happened was you had the top level first and then you built the infrastructure underneath. And to be honest, with my association with the sport has been exactly the same, right? So I was a sports editor at the Daily Mirror newspaper. I was the online sports editor there, and I was arguing with the editors there about we need to cover top level MMA, and we had to cover the UFC, and it took a while to get them to actually come around to my way of thinking and realise that I was right, which eventually they did. But we started by covering the UFC, and nothing like GSP versus Shields was the event because it was the anniversary a couple of weeks ago, and I put a tweet out about it.
UFC 129, the stadium event.
Right? That was the show that finally the penny dropped, and they said, "Okay, so you've actually got a point here." But the coverage.
I used to argue with sports editors back then and said, like, there's 15,000 people going to an event. I'm like, if there's 15,000 people watching somebody get a cat out of a tree out of there, we should write about it because 15,000 people in our community are there.
Yeah. Oh, it's crazy. No, this is probably for another show, but I could give you 20 minutes, half an hour on the stuff that I've had to do to try and just in my little bubble try and encourage people to let me do this stuff. But with the whole grassroots thing, the grassroots is so important, because if you don't have that, then the top of the sport is going to struggle over time, because where's the talent coming from?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And we were talking earlier, and we're talking about how much fun it is being at events like this, And I mentioned to you being at the IMAFs a couple of years ago. I got to be there as a young journalist mentor, and honestly, it's one of the most fun events I've ever been at, because it's the future of the sport, but it had that Olympic vibe to it. The different cages.
It's so cool.
It was chaotic. It was brilliant. It was during the pandemic. I was having something shoved up my nose every other day. That bit wasn't so fun, but no, knowing that you've got the fighters on the come up, and you can see the stars of tomorrow today, and that's for me, that's great. And we could be watching a future UFC champion tomorrow night.
Yes,
we just don't know, but the fact that we'll watch the fights tomorrow, and we will come away from tomorrow and say, that guy's got a chance.
That's somebody I want to keep my eye on.
That guy's got a chance. And it's those moments that really matter. Like the fighters that I've built relationships with in the UK, who started out as just prospects and have made it to the top and have done really well. It's because I was covering them early.
Yeah.
And being able to follow people's story, and like whenever a young journo says to me, "What's your advice about getting into the sport?" I'm like, cover the local scene where you are. Just get the reps. A, you get the access. B, the people you talk to will be delighted to talk to you, and it will help. And eventually, you'll latch onto people who you know are on the way up.
Yep.
And that will help you level up just as they do. And the best example of that is the website Severe MMA, which is an outstanding outlet. They do incredible work. They've been on the scene for a long time now. Their rise coincided with the rise of Irish MMA, with Connor and Cole Pendred and Paddy Houlihan.
Yeah.
It was one of those where it was a perfect moment for them. It was a perfect moment for them. And you've got a situation now where we've got the next generation of Belgian fighters coming up, and we're going to be here for the start of that, and I'm looking forward to it.
So cool, man. It's sending me on this like reminiscing journey of Tough Enough, and when Tough Enough was only doing amateur fights, now they're doing pro as well. Obviously, the most famous example, Ronda Rousey. I got to see Ronda as an amateur, and I was like, oh my God, she's going to be something. But a funny one is Alain Jobin called his final amateur fight, called his first professional fight, and now, I'm seeing him at the Apex doing commentary and stuff, and I watch his whole career and all the way to the UFC, and now he's in commentary and analysis, and A, just goes to show you how old I am, but B, it's just, it's cool. Like, I love doing that stuff, and yeah, man, I don't know, man, I get excited. I can sit here and just talk about that kind of stuff all day.
It's awesome. It's awesome. It's a crazy, mad sport to be involved with, but when you get the chance to sort of get both ends of the spectrum, to be able to be at the big superstar shows and experience some of the biggest moments in MMA history is awesome.
Yes.
But in a very different way, it is also awesome to be at the other end of the spectrum and seeing the stars building up.
I think you hit it, because I don't want to be disingenuous about, like, I feel like to be like, hey, John, well, you can cover the grassroots scene if you never go to another UFC. I'm like, can't we get a little bit of both? Like, I want to see the highest level of the sport, but I still am just as passionate about this.
That's exactly it. All
right, let's talk about, I said we wouldn't go too far in the Bellator Champions Series, but I guess I just want to get for your perspective from a European. As I said, the fights are basically starting as we sit here. In fact, there might have been some prelims already. We haven't seen. We're going to watch the replay immediately afterwards. Obviously, all the talk about this Patchy mix, Magomedov. I did see, actually, literally just before we sat down, that Patchy and his girl got engaged over there while they're in Paris. So, yeah.
City of romance. Under the Eiffel Tower. Why not?
Making big moves right there. Maybe she's going to be a UFC champion very soon, and he's already a Bellator champion looking to defend the belt. So watch out if they have kids. Go ahead and put them on your radar for future prospects.
That's some talented genes right there.
Yes, it is. So everyone talks about the main event, talks about Cedric Doumbé versus Jaleel Willis. That's been fun to watch. I mean, Doumbé is obviously a global superstar, incredible, kickboxing. He's fun to watch. Jaleel Willis, though, is not going in there to be a stepping stone, so it could be fun. But was there anybody, I mean, obviously all the talk was about the main and the co-main, but was there anybody that was on the card that you felt was maybe slipping through the cracks that you are intrigued to see what happens? Again, will probably have already happened by the time most people listen to this, but there are any names that you were like, I really had this one circled?
Well, Mansour Bonawi is one of these fighters who, he's been around for ages. He's been around for absolutely ages, and it's only really now that he's sort of elevated himself to the very, very top in terms of fighting for a global promotion. He fought in the Grand Prix, fell just short in terms of making it all the way to the end. He's got himself a tough matchup against Yusuke Yachi, who is even more experienced than he is. That's an interesting one. Yves Landau, your boy, as I always enjoy the ring announcement of Yves, your boy Landau.
Eric Anders has something to say about that.
Oh no, sorry, it's not your boy. It's not your boy. It's
Oh,
it's you know.
That's
why.
Right,
Yves, I didn't know. I got it wrong. Sorry, Yves, I didn't know. I'll know for next time.
Next time will be remember the name.
It's Yves, from last time, Landau. He's taking on Jonas Billerino. Now, if that name rings any bells for you, former training partner of Jose Aldo, who broke his rib in sparring and caused the cancellation of the fight with Conor McGregor, or the postponement.
Because Jonas Billerino was the one that was in there mimicking Conor McGregor.
Hit him with a spinning back kick, damaged the ribs, was going to be UFC 189. Chad Mendes gets the call on short notice, and then obviously we know what happened after that. But he's a talented striker. He's been around a bit. Landau, he always seems to perform for the fans. And also on the card, just continuing sort of the French theme, Gregory Babin. I believe he's a judoka, but he's pretty heavy-handed, taking on Costello Van Steenis, long-time training partner of Gegard Mousasi. Looks like an absolute savage, and more often than not fights like one as well. That should be a good one at 185 pounds as well.
I love it. Well, as soon as we finish here, we'll be turning that one on, watching on DAZN over here. All right, I want to ask you briefly about the UFC. It kind of worked out great that you're here, even though I was not in Las Vegas to be at the media day. And, of course, Cold Coffee was and could help break it down, except that he's not here right now. It kind of works out because Lerone Murphy is in the main event. This is an event that, if we're being honest with you, a lot of people are just kind of ho-hum about. But I think regardless of whether you're a European journalist or a European fan, if you're a fight fan, I think you should be excited about the main event. I mean, obviously, anytime Edson Barbosa competes, you know you're going to get a fight. Lerone Murphy, though, I want you to tell me about your impressions of Lerone because, gosh, man, I feel like, first of all, he kind of came into the rankings, slid out of the ranking. He was just on the cusp of it, right? So he's one of those guys that when somebody would have a big result, they would enter and push him out, and then somebody would lose, and he would get back in. And so he's been kind of teetering in and out of the rankings. But good Lord, is he the quietest, undefeated? I mean, I know he has the draw, but technically, does not have a loss. His run in the UFC, and I know part of it has been consistency in competing. I don't know how much of that, to be honest, has been the UFC not offering fights or him not being available. I mean, it just seems like there were long stretches of time. I know he had to withdraw from a couple of fights. There were some cancellations, but I don't know. I guess I'm talking a lot to just say, like, Lerone Murphy to me is this, like, intriguing mystery of a man who has an incredible record, by all accounts, a fun fighting style, seems somewhat marketable, but just you just never hear. Nobody ever mentions his name.
He's like the best kept secret in the UK MMA in terms of on the big stage. His nickname is the Miracle, and that is a well-earned nickname. Let me tell you, he walked out of a barber's shop in Manchester and got shot in the face twice. Shot in the face twice.
Insane.
And lived. Okay, so that's why he's called the Miracle. Some people's nicknames are a bit contrived and a little bit this. No. He is a miracle.
He is an absolute miracle.
There is absolutely no argument. But in terms of his fighting, he's, I mentioned Manchester top team to you earlier and saying that they were doing some big things. Head coach Carl Prince runs the gym up there. He will be in Lerone's corner this weekend, and I had a chance to chat to Carl in Birmingham at a recent Octagon show, and we talked about this fight. They really like this matchup with Edson Barbosa. But in terms of Lerone's career, look at the strength of schedule as well. I mean, he's not been facing scrubs. He went in there, he fought Zubaira Tukagov in Abu Dhabi.
That was such a tough match.
Without wanting to come across as a bit of a UK homer, he got hosed with the decision. It was a split decision draw, and I don't know anybody.
I think a lot of people were scratching their head after that.
I don't know anybody who thought that he didn't win that fight. So that's the one minor blemish on his record. He fights Ricardo Ramos, who was 14-2. Finishes him in the first round. Fights Douglas.
And Ramos is probably one of those guys that doesn't get all the respect that he deserves. I remember that matchmaking because I was like, well, this sucks because these are two dudes that deserve respect.
Someone's going to get a loss. Yeah, you got Douglas Silva de Andrade, who is seasoned to hell and has only lost a couple of fights himself. He beats him. Makwan Amirkhani, who
on his day can be,
as a grappler, is absolutely horrible to deal with.
Yep.
He finishes him with a knee in the second round. Gabriel Santos hands him his first loss.
Undefeated
Josh
at the time,
Kulabau hands him his second loss. And now he's got Edson Barbosa, and Barbosa's a legend of the sport, right? He's one of these fighters who hasn't got a championship belt, but he's got the highlight reel.
Oh.
If you could put a highlight reel in the UFC Hall of Fame, Edson Barboza's top of the list.
Yep.
Right? And I don't know how you do that in terms of the criteria that the UFC use, but Edson Barboza's highlight reel is ridiculous.
Hall of Famer.
Yeah, I think in the same way that like Jim Miller deserves to be a UFC Hall of Famer, you could make a similar argument for Edson Barboza.
I mean, this is UFC walk number 30
yeah.
for Edson Barboza. And as you said, the highlight reel, I mean, the Edom knockout obviously lives in history. But, I mean, brutality, the leg kick knockouts that he had early on. Yeah, look, maybe some people may say my bar is not high enough. I don't care. I think Edson Barboza is a UFC Hall of Famer. I know, and Jim Miller, you can't even argue with me that he is.
Jim Miller's got the record and the stats where you could sit and say, yeah, he's a Hall of Famer. Edson Barboza maybe doesn't have that, but all he has to do is put a YouTube video on and go, have a look at that.
Yep.
Tell me I'm not a Hall of Famer.
So I digress.
Show me another fighter who can do this. And there aren't many, right?
I digress.
Lerone Murphy he's one of these fighters, despite the fact his record is so good and despite the fact he's beaten a lot of fighters who are they've also got outstanding records but maybe aren't the big name. I don't think we've scratched the surface of how good this guy is yet. And it's interesting, hearing him speak at Media Day, he said that he thinks that Barboza is a great matchup for him because he carries that level of danger. He carries that level of, that he called it a fear factor.
Makes you be on edge.
And he said when he fights against, and he's got that fear factor, that's when he brings the best out of himself. And I think that he's got the fight IQ, he's got the coaching team behind him, and I think he's got the technical ability. I think all he needs to do is just let loose just a little bit more than he does. And I think people are going to be like, whoa, this guy is a serious... If he's not a problem already, which he is, if he goes in there...
That's a fair criticism. Sometimes it feels like he could let it go a little more.
If he goes in there and finishes Edson Barboza on Saturday, I think it's time to start talking about him as a real problem because, you've got other people who have had strong records and they work their way up and they win fights and then they find themselves at the top. The problem that he has is it's kind of like the Leon Edwards problem when he was on his way up. He's not got that fashionable name. He's not got that larger than life personality that draws people to want to fight you. But you take one look at his record and go, I don't want to fight that guy.
Yeah.
He's a horrible matchup for anybody in that weight class. Anybody.
It's a big fight for him, man. If he could win, and look, Edson's 38, man. We know, I just said that I think he's a Hall of Famer, but he's 38, and his style is, now granted, he's very defensively sound. I think he's a little bit more, he's not just going for damage. He's going for tactical approach at this point in his career. But at some point, speed, timing, those things start to deteriorate a little bit, right? Yeah,
and also, but I think like the crucial thing with this, Edson Barboza has a number next to his name. He's listed 12th in the UFC's featherweight rankings. If Lerone Murphy goes in there and beats him, this is not... I know you've had this conversation on the podcast before. Just beating a guy with the ranking doesn't mean you automatically assume his place. However...
Even though the interviewer will say that.
However... There's a fair chance that if he goes in there and beats Edson Barboza, he'll be listed between 12 and 15
I would agree.
By Monday morning.
Yep.
If he goes in there and finishes Edson Barboza, then we're really looking at something. And then his next fight's going to be in the top 10. And if he wins that, his next fight's going to be in the top 5. And if he wins that, he's on the cusp of a title shot. He's one good year away from being a contender for the title at 145 pounds. He's got all the talent in the world to do it. He's flying under the radar because he doesn't have the big name on his record. Edson Barboza, according to you and me, is a future Hall of Famer. If he's on his record, maybe that starts to change.
I love it. Listen, this is it's going to be interesting for us. Of course, as always, for our folks over at patreon.com/the MMA Road Show, we will have an and a half episode recapping this event. And the way it works, with Apollo MMA 1, we should wrap up pretty much right about the time the UFC is starting. We may miss like an early prelim or two that we have to catch up on. We're going to see how it works. You've got to travel home on Sunday morning. I've got to fly home on Sunday morning as well. But if we can squeeze this in, I don't know if I'm going to be able to pull this marathon thing, but if we can pull this marathon thing off, maybe we'll get back together and do an and a half episode with you recapping as well.
There's no maybe, John.
We're going to find a way
There's
to do it.
There's no maybe. We've done a 7-hour live stream in Vegas.
We have done a 7-hour
We can do
live
this.
stream in Vegas.
And also, my train home isn't until tomorrow afternoon. Sunday afternoon.
Sunday
anyway.
afternoon.
So, and yeah,
And I'll just pull an all-nighter because I'm actually going here to Heathrow, Heathrow to LA, and LA to Vegas. So that Heathrow to LA, I think, is like 10 and a half, 11 hours. So if I'm a little tired, it probably would be the worst thing. Yeah, it would be the worst thing to just pass out. So we might pull an all-nighter. Maybe we'll give the and a half recap with a little Apollo MMA talk and some UFC talk as well. So that's what the expectations are. All right, listen, I wanted to get your take on the Roman Murphy, but again, it kind of worked out perfect that we changed the timing to bring you in because I wanted to get your take on UFC 304. Now, I am sad to say I am confirmed. Actually, I don't know if I'm supposed to say this or not.
You're unavailable.
I'm unavailable. Well done, sir. I was thinking about making the trip to, I mean, read between the lines, not that hard to figure out.
Boo.
Yeah. But I will not be
chose
there.
to not go.
Yeah, I am contractually unavailable on that night. And I was looking at going over there, which we were kind of looking fun because we were going to reenact the years before 205, right? It was
204?
It was 204. So it was 100 to 204. Where we did the all-nighter for, of course, Henderson and Bisping, the rematch there, where everybody was tuckered out at 5 a.m., but because we had been responsibly staying up and drinking excessively all week long to keep our schedules on point, we were fine.
Possibly the stupidest week we've ever had covering MMA.
It really was.
It was insane. Like, just going out to get food and having to sort of run the gauntlet of Manchester drunk people.
It was bad.
Was quite something.
It was memorable. We had fun. It was one of those. Man, I feel like this is the reminiscing episode, but like when we would get those big Airbnbs, and you know, I mean, we had a couple where we got some really nice properties. I remember that was a nice property.
That was a good one. I remember
not as good as the one in Stockholm. Stockholm was the all-time best Airbnb
Stockholm.
we got. You didn't do that one.
I've never been to Sweden for UFC.
Abby and Sandu were there, and obviously Per was there as well. We had an all-timer Airbnb there with like a 70-inch TV in there. We were it was dope. But the one in Manchester, I remember we had like that table we set up at the big King's table or whatever. We set up, and all right. So anyway. I thought we were going to be reenacting that. We're not going to be reenacting that. But give me your thoughts on this. I mean, the fight card, I don't think anybody can argue with the fight card. The fight card, to me, for UFC 304 looks exactly like it should. Leon Edwards, Bilal Muhammad. I'm sorry. I understand, you know, there's a lot of people in the welterweight division that feel that maybe they should be there, but you can't deny that win streak that Bilal Muhammad is on. And when you add in the history between the two of them as well, like that is 100% the fight to make. Now, the argument may come with Tom Aspinall. Okay, were there other fights to make for Tom Aspinall? Possibly. I know he mentioned that Sirgan was the original, intention, but Sirgan's filming a movie. But I know what everybody's going to say is it should be Aspinall and Jones. Look, we could debate that all day long. We know that Jones and Stipe is the plan, so deal with it. It's just reality. That's just what it is. I mean, Dana has basically said that's what we're doing. Everybody shut up. So you can debate with that. But if you're left with, I mean, Aspinall, I'm glad Aspinall is staying busy. I'm glad it's Vince. This is good. And then look, Bobby Green, Paddy Pimblett, fun fight. I mean, Paddy Pimblett has had a number of potential suitors, but Bobby Green is a fun one. Arnold Allen, Giga Chikadze, I think that's a fantastic fight. Mohamed Mokaev, Manel Kopp. I had a chance to speak to Manel, by the way, earlier this week. That's going to come out next week. For Grind City Media, starting to do a little bit more interviews for them. But Manel said straight up, he's like, he wouldn't even let me finish the question where I was like, do you think this is the number one contender fight? Because I started to go down the rankings. Like, you look at 2, you look at 3. He's like, wouldn't even let me finish. He's like, the winner gets it. He's like, I'm winning this fight and I get a title shot. So anyway, the first 5 fights have all been announced. I don't think you can argue with them, man. I think it looks like a great fight card, a great start to the fight card. The argument, of course, is the time, right? And it's funny because when 204 happened, I felt like there was some pushback, but I think it was also like, I don't know, maybe it was just like, well, this is weird, but we're happy we're having this, and so let's do this. I feel like 100 pay-per-views later, I don't feel like there's quite the jovial, like, well, this is fun. I don't know. I mean, I saw even Tom Aspinall, right? He kind of mentioned like, I kind of wish we could switch this or whatever. So I don't know what you take, because I just – and maybe look, there's been a lot of MMA that has happened between now and then, and maybe we just went into it with, the silver lining, or maybe we were just having fun because we were all together. We were like, this will just be a fun challenge. But I don't know. Does it feel like there's more pushback to the middle of the night time this time around? And do you feel like it's a mistake, or it's just this is the way the business goes?
I think to compare the two, the landscape of MMA in the UK and the landscape of the market that the UFC occupies in the UK is very different now to how it was at UFC 204. Back then, we didn't get many pay-per-views over here in the UK. Having one was a novelty and something that we weren't used to getting.
Right.
When the UFC first started coming over, back in sort of the double-digit days of the UFC pay-per-views. We used to have stuff on local time then. But then we went through what I would call like the golden years where the sport just really took off. Right. And Michael Bisping becoming the first UK UFC champion, UFC 199. That was a big deal.
Who was the UK journalist that was there the night that he won the title? I'm trying to remember who it was. I think there was only one, if I recall correctly.
This guy.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Anyway, right.
I know what a proud moment that was for you.
It was good to be there. And
I know Bisping's always been very very kind to you, man.
He's a good dude. He's a good dude. But yeah, so as soon as he won the title, and we did a sit down a couple of weeks later when he came home, and it was like, I want the Manchester show. I want a Manchester show. I want to fight in Manchester. I want to bring the belt home and defend it on home soil. In his entire career, he's had some ups and downs. Never lost on UK soil, Michael Bisping, and he's so proud of that.
Including, my gosh, still, I just have to say it. To this day, one of my favorite fights of all time.
The Silva fight.
Silva, yeah. You and I were sitting next to each other, and unbelievable.
It was a movie in UFC fight form.
Anyway,
it was
didn't mean to slow you down.
Incredible.
I just can't let it go without saying that is still to my day one of my favorite fights I've ever seen.
Absolutely mental, that fight, and that night was just crazy. But the Dan Henderson rematch, there was a lot of controversy over Henderson getting that rematch.
Right.
But it was, from a storyline point of view and from a promotion point of view, it was perfect insofar as the way Dan Henderson can almost ruin Michael Bisping's career in the eyes of many people watching. I mean, Bisping got wrote off after that knockout at UFC 100.
Made the Flying Punches logo, like, talk about salt in the wound.
And then dropped him twice with it at UFC 204, and Bisping still came back and beat him. But because that back then was an era where we didn't get pay-per-views in the UK, it was like, okay, Bisping's coming home to defend his belt. That's awesome. It's going to be a UFC pay-per-view on UK soil. That's awesome. It's going to be at 3 a.m. for the main card. Okay, we'll take it.
Yeah.
Right? Now, we've had pay-per-views on UK time zone in London the last 2-3 years now. Mm-hmm. Leon Edwards beat Kamaru Usman in their trilogy fight on UK soil in London at UK prime time. Huge fight. That's a world title fight, and a big one, right? So it's not like it can't be done. I don't know why, given that it's a pay-per-view, I don't know what the deal is with ESPN Plus or how much latitude the UFC has. I mean, whether they have total control over their broadcast times for pay-per-views or whether they have to hit a certain number in a certain time frame. I'm not privy to that. And maybe that's the reason, because that really is the only justifiable one for doing it. Because to be honest, besides that, it makes zero sense to have it at 3 a.m.
It's funny because it's funny because I was thinking
it's harder for the fighters as well.
It is.
It's harder for the fighters as well. Even though you're flying over, even if you're, I mean, you lived it as a journalist. You flew over, and normally what you would do, you would fly over. You'd have a tricky day or two where you sort of adjust to the UK time frame, and then you're off and running. Right? If you're a fighter, obviously that's a little bit more pronounced. You've got a bit more of that to deal with. But imagine coming over, like just your biorhythms and everything, and being awake when it's pitch black outside. You're not getting any daylight, and
well, we lived in Abu Dhabi as well, right, for lengthy periods of time.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing and you nailed it. It's like you can say, look, mathematically, all you have to do is stay on this schedule right here.
Yeah.
But that's easier said than done when it comes to what that means is staying awake when it's dark and going to sleep when it's super bright outside. Yep. You know what I mean? And as dumb as that sounds, it's really hard to do.
Availability of facilities as well. You can't just pop out for a meal at 3 a.m.
Great point.
Right? You just can't do that.
So here's what I'm interested in, because somebody was asking me the other day, and it's whirlwind obviously sometimes, but somebody was like, do you think that they might change that? And I said, absolutely not. There's no way. Like once they announce it, they're not changing it. But I am starting to think, because listen, ESPN does have a lot more of the call than the UFC does, right? And again, you and I have had conversations with people that we know that when they do these off-time pay-per-views, should it be in the day or whatever, they essentially just say take 20% off the top, right? Because the bottom, your hardcores, your baseline number, they're always going to find a way. They're going to know, right? But the average consumer that is just a casual fan, they're not going to know. Like, no, this is a Saturday afternoon card, and it's so hard to get the messaging out. Like, people are just used to UFC being at 10 p.m. Eastern on a Saturday night, so it's hard. But, and I mean this is no disrespect to anybody on this card, But you look at this. This isn't a big selling pay-per-view, right? Like, I mean, when UFC 300 was rolling around, right, and there was discussion about Leon Edwards and Bilal Muhammad being in the main event, right, because they needed a title fight, and what are we going to – and literally, and again, I mean this is no disrespect. This is a title fight that needs to happen. But everybody said, you can't put that as the headliner of UFC 300. You know what I mean? Because it's just not a huge numbers-driving, title fight, right?
Yep.
So when I look at this on paper – okay, let's say whatever the baseline number for this, automatically you can take 20% off the top, but that's 20% of not a really big number. I would suspect this would be not. I would suspect it would perform better than 301, from a bias perspective, but not hugely so.
Let me chuck something else into that mix as well. This is going to be a pay-per-view in the UK as well.
Oh my! Is it really?
I would be gobsmacked if it isn't.
Because they still have that ability to just turn certain ones into
Every time a UK fighter is headlining a title fight, it's been pay-per-view.
So why would you want
on
that
TNT Sports? But there you go.
Why would you want
there you go. So they're losing that market.
It
as
appeals
well.
more to that audience than anybody else.
Do you know what I would do? And this is a little bit of a turkey voting for Christmas by saying, yeah, make it pay-per-view in the UK. If you're going to put it on at 3 a.m., don't make it pay-per-view in the UK. If you want to make it a pay-per-view in the UK, put it on at prime time and do some sort of subscription deal where maybe offer it for how much is a pay-per-view in the States? $80?
Yeah.
Right. Offer it for $39.99. Afternoon show, matinee show in the States, and do it whereby you sort of attach it to renewing your subscription to ESPN Plus or something like this, where you get something on the back end. Or you chuck in a year's fight pass, or just do something that gives you something on the back end. But by putting it on at 3 a.m. and if they also TNT, I hope that TNT Sports are sensible enough to not put this on pay-per-view if it's going to be a 3 a.m. main card.
I agree.
I really, really hope so. But based on how things have been, and we have had 3 a.m. cards on pay-per-view before when it's been a big Conor fight. I think International Fight Week has been a pay-per-view in the past as well. So it's interesting because there is a pay-per-view market in the UK, albeit smaller, for UFC, and this is a prime opportunity to do that. But it's
two British champs.
Two British champs. It's the first time it's ever happened.
It's amazing. It's
first time it's ever happened.
It's funny because, and we always talk, when people say, oh, I don't like the Apex, you should put everything in an arena. I'm like, well, there's business reasons why it isn't. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But now I'm like, hold on, man. If we again, and look, there's people at the UFC that have access to far more analytics than we do, and they're talking about big numbers, whereas we're just talking about theory, right? They're talking about bottom lines that they have to deliver on.
Yep.
But when you lay it out the way you laid it out, I don't know, man. I just feel from an overall financial perspective and an overall fan building perspective, man, it just feels like maybe. I mean, we're still a full 2 months out. It's not like we're trying to change this thing 2 weeks out. We're still a full 2 months out. Maybe there's a slight possibility they'll say, you know what, you're right. The right thing to do is put this in prime time.
The other thing, which is another factor that probably argues a little bit against what we're talking about, is if you're a UFC,
don't make that point. No, I'm just kidding.
if you're a UFC champion and you're on a UFC pay-per-view, you get points.
Yeah.
You don't want your fight to be taken off pay-per-view.
True.
You don't necessarily want a discounted pay-per-view.
True.
Right.
That's true too. That's
so
true too.
I'm now arguing against myself.
Leon
here.
and Tom are like, bro, settle down, Simon.
And this is why, if anybody from the UFC's finance department were to listen to this, they'd probably be laughing up their sleeves, going, "Ha!
Right.
These guys don't have a Scooby-Doo what they're talking about."
And you know what? And I have to agree with them. They're true. They're right. Because we don't get to see the hard figures.
Absolutely,
so.
absolutely. And you've got to maximise. Obviously, you're trying to maximise your profit, but there's also you've got two British champions here. You can really create a monster here, especially with someone like Tom Aspinall. Leon has climbed and reached a mountaintop. I can't imagine he's ever going to top that moment in Salt Lake City where he knocked out Kamaru Usman. That was
amazing.
That's
career highlight.
It's the greatest commentary line in MMA history,
right? In
my opinion, from John Anik. That is not the cloth from which he's cut. Bang, knockout, right? And it's also one of the best, or it's one of the biggest shocks in UFC title fight history.
100%.
And it was also one of the best knockouts in UFC title fight history. So, check, right? And Leon swept the board at the MMA Awards last year, justifiably for those sorts of things. Tom Aspinall is still on the way up. In my opinion, my humble opinion, he's a champion in everything. But basically, the word interim should be struck off the record
100%.
After this.
Tom Aspinall,
if he beats Curtis Blades, he is the de facto champion.
Tom Aspinall has a chance to be an all-time great.
Yeah.
An all-time great.
Now, Curtis Blades could go in there and beat him.
Yes.
Because heavyweight MMA is heavyweight MMA, and Curtis Blades is a very talented heavyweight.
And I think Curtis Blades is probably the toughest matchup for Tom Aspinall in the division, if I'm being honest with you.
Yes, he is. Yes, he is. Absolutely. And
that's why we were so disappointed the way it played out the first time, right? Because we were really excited about that matchup.
It was the acid test. It was the acid test. Unfortunately, his knee failed the test before the rest of his body had a chance to take it. So,
the rest of him was good to go.
It was one of those. But like, this is a chance to really. Also, if you want to really play the long game, or you really want to put the squeeze on John Jones, you make the Aspinall Blades fight or this event as accessible as possible in the States, right? You make it as accessible as possible, and you make it as accessible as possible in the UK, because if he goes and beats Curtis Blades, grabs that microphone, and then starts saying, "Where you at? Where you at, Johnny Bones? When you're tired of fighting 40-year-old firemen, come and see a guy who's got right. That's.
I like it.
Do you know what I mean? And this is an opportunity because John Jones is a goat. He's the goat of MMA in my opinion.
Mine
right?
Too.
He's not the heavyweight goat though, but he's the goat of MMA. And the one thing he won't beat is Father Time. He will have to retire at some point, and he may retire after the Stipe fight. He may retire in a year or so. The UFC needs their next guy. It needs their next heavyweight star, and in Aspinall, potentially, they've got one. So it's in their best interest to be building. And if they ever get Aspinall and Jones in the cage together, awesome. My gut feeling is that they are not going to fight.
I agree.
And I don't think John Jones stands to benefit at all from facing him. And
that's not if he wins, you should have. That dude wasn't ready. It's not
a criticism of John Jones, and it's not a criticism of Tom Aspinall, because I think Tom Aspinall would have an outstanding chance of beating John Jones at heavyweight. An outstanding chance of beating him. But John Jones gets, like, the upside, the risk-reward thing is not there for Johnny Bones. And, you know...
All risk, no reward.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think if he beats Stipe and we have a double retirement at the end of that, I think that's probably the best thing for the UFC heavyweight division.
I agree.
Which can then kick on with a new generation of heavyweights. But... yeah, as for this event, I think for the UK market, the card's coming together really nicely. It's coming together really nicely, and I just hope that I'd love for them to do something about the start time. I really would.
The thing that just occurred to me is, again, it's funny, man. My brain going through the past. Remember Dana White used to always talk about boxing's problem was that it was always a fire sale, and they were always trying to create as much money as they can with each event. And he even used to talk about the fact that I remember when I was a kid, and they put everything on pay-per-view, and they didn't put anything on network TV anymore, and you couldn't see the big fights you wanted to see, and it was just because they were trying to squeeze every last dollar. And again, they have a business to run. Like, I always talk about this from a realistic perspective. Understand, this is a for-profit company that has a huge overhead, so they've got bills to pay, right? But this does feel like one of those moments where if you just insist on doing it in that overnight slot, that you're basically just saying, like, well, that's what we do. Not, you know what really makes sense here?
Yeah.
Is to deliver it in prime time for the UK audience.
It's not optimizing the opportunity, is it?
It isn't. All right. Speaking of optimizing the opportunity, yeah, there you go. Is it the going out of sale business? That's what he used to call it, right? The going out of sale business. Good. Nice shout out there from Matt over there. All right, listen. Speaking of optimizing the opportunity, your first opportunity to call fights tomorrow night. We talked about it. Nerves, feel, excitement. What's the feeling going? First question here. Simon Head debut tomorrow night on the microphone. Give us the feel one day ahead of this unique opportunity.
I'm looking forward to it. It's something that I think I'm going to be okay at and enjoy doing, but I could completely sort of stink the place out tomorrow. So I just don't know. You know, it could be terrible, and it'd be like, yeah, I get on with Si really well, but he sucks at commentary. We're going to find out. But the thing
there's only one way to find out. That's to go to ApolloMMA.com. And
that's the thing. Like this fight card is absolutely chock full of people trying to prove themselves, and I'm another one. Right? No, I'm really looking forward to it, and to be able to call fights with one of my best mates in the sport is going to be a lot of fun.
I agree. I just don't see any way it could go wrong. Like I said,
Don't say that.
We've talked about, well, there's a lot of ways it could go wrong. I'm not going to let it go wrong, but you and I have talked about a lot of MMA over the years, so I don't see any reason we couldn't enjoy talking about it live. So if you want to tune in at ApolloMMA.com, we're delivering it in European prime time because we care about the people over here in Belgium and everywhere else in Europe. That's what's up. Look forward to it. Man, glad to have you over here. Now, we're in Belgium, so we got some frosty beverages to drink. It's still early. It's still daylight outside. We got to turn on a little Bellator Champions Series, start tapping into these Belgian beers. And, yeah, look forward to that. Look forward to you joining us for the and-a-half episode. We'll see how that goes. Hopefully the energy stays high. In the meantime, everybody, enjoy the weekend. Hopefully enjoy some Apollo MMA. And thanks for listening.